Good day, dear students. I welcome you all in Gyandoot 2.0 English online classes. I am Mrs. Alka Panwar from Government Girls College, and today we are going to discuss the elements of Shakespearean tragedy. Shakespearean tragedy has certain basic salient features which we are going to discuss today in our class. So let us first keep in mind the four major tragedies written by William Shakespeare. They are Hamlet, Macbeth, King Lear, and Othello. Shakespeare based his tragic plays on the definition given by Aristotle. And Aristotle said a tragedy is an imitation of an action that is serious and also having magnitude complete in itself, with incidents arousing pity and fear, wherewith to accomplish catharsis of these emotions. Now, tragedy, it is a serious play, a play which ends seriously, is an imitation of an action. Imitation not of any person, but imitation of an action, a storyline, a plot. And that storyline is serious in nature, that is not comic. Having certain magnitude. Now, magnitude here means the proportion, the length of the play. It should not be too long so as to miss the tragic effect, and it should not be too short. Complete in itself, it means that it has got a proper beginning, middle, and an end. A tragedy does not necessarily begin with the birth of the hero. The beginning of the tragedy generally depends on the moment of crisis in the protagonist's life. Now, there is a beginning, a middle, and an end. The beginning is followed by the middle, and the end is the result of the beginning and the middle, with incidents arousing pity and fear, wherewith to accomplish catharsis of these emotions. Now, what do you mean by catharsis? Catharsis is the purgation of the feelings of pity and fear through a tragedy. Now, let us discuss some of the salient features of Shakespearean tragedy. Shakespearean tragedy has a tragic hero. Now, if you must have noticed my lecture on salient features of Shakespearean comedy, I said that in Shakespearean comedies, the female heroines, the female protagonists, are given more significance and space in the Shakespearean comedy rather than Shakespearean tragedy. But in a tragedy, there is a male hero, and that hero belongs to the royal strata of the society. He is a royal person. He can be a king, an army general, or an aristocratic person. He has high social status, virtuous character, and he faces adversity. The hero in the Shakespearean tragedy generally dies in the end, and there is a reversal of fortune in the life of the tragic hero. Reversal of fortune means contrast between what he was and what he is. Now, why does Shakespeare choose his hero from a high social status? Because the downfall from the higher place is more prominent than a downfall from a lower place. And it is also important for arousing fear. We the common people feel that if a king or an army general can suffer by his tragic flaw, we are common human beings. We can suffer too. And his downfall affects a lot of people. That is why, in order to create the maximum maximum tragic effect, he chooses the hero who belongs to the royal class of the society. Now, he is of virtuous character. This is also very important component of the Shakespearean hero, tragic hero. Because of his being virtuous, we pity for him. Because he suffers without deserving. And his downfall becomes more prominent. So, his characteristics are that he is a great person and he is good person also. Besides greatness, he has to have goodness, because when a good person falls, we all cry for him, we all pity him. Ravan was also great, but his downfall is celebrated as the Dashera. So he had greatness, but he did not have goodness. So he can't be a tragic hero. A tragic hero needs to be great as well as good. And he has to be consistent in his behavior, in his actions. Now, this tragic hero suffers with one weakness of personality or tragic flaw, which in Greek language we call hamartia. There is a hamartia in each and every tragic hero by William Shakespeare. This hamartia is a weakness of personality, a tragic flaw with which the hero suffers and which leads him to his downfall. So, this weakness of personality is inaction in Hamlet. Hamlet does not act when he should act, and he acts when he shouldn't have. So, that gives rise to the tragedy. So, the tragic flaw in Hamlet was his inaction and overbrooding. He used to act less and think more. And in Macbeth, this tragic flaw is inordinate ambition. He is already very much honored, he is already very much trusted, and he is already enjoying a very high post in the king's court, in the king's army. But still, his ambition provokes him to lead towards his own catastrophe, in his death. Now, this tragic flaw in Othello is his gullibility. He easily believed that his wife Desdemona is not faithful to him. And this gullibility, he believes what he listens. And so he does not trust his wife and he kills her. So, irreversible actions happen in Shakespearean tragedy. When once he has killed Desdemona because of his gullibility, this serious action cannot be reverted. And that leads to the guilt in Othello's heart, and that leads to his final downfall and death. Tragic end of Othello. And this tragic flaw in King Lear is his misjudgment. He loves to listen to his praises. He loves to listen to his two elder daughters' false praises and flatterings. But he is not ready to listen to the real account of King Lear as a father by his youngest daughter, who speaks the truth, who has a very balanced attitude towards her father and her future husband. So, this misjudgment leads to a series of tragic events in the life of King Lear. So, this hamartia or tragic flaw is a necessary element in Shakespeare's hero, which leads them towards their downfall and their tragic end. Now, because it is a tragedy, so the plot is so arranged, the sequence of events is so arranged that the action is irreversible. It can't be reversed. So that leads to the tragic waste. It leads to the death and tragic waste of not only the bad characters but also of the protagonist and also of the good characters, and that is why it is a tragedy. So, death and tragic waste is one of the significant salient features of Shakespearean tragedy. Hamlet, for example, he wastes his life and others' lives too due to his overthinking, overbrooding, and inaction. Not only he died, but so many other people died due to his tragic flaw. Macbeth, who was a trustworthy army general, he ends up as a murderer and loses his own life too. King Lear loses his best daughter and is abused by the other two daughters who flattered him. And Othello murders his innocent wife and finally kills himself. Now, when I use this word irreversible, it also refers to the irreversible action, to the sequence and arrangement of events. Suppose the scene of revelation that Desdemona was innocent is placed before the scene of Desdemona's murder. Then the murder could have been avoided, but it could not have been a tragedy then. Then it could have been a comedy in which all is well that ends well, in which every misunderstanding is resolved in the end and they lived happily ever after. But the sequence of events is very important in order to make the action irreversible. Othello, after murdering his wife Desdemona, after murdering, he comes to know that his wife Desdemona was truthful. She did not betray him, but the action of murder now can't be reversed. It is irreversible. So, due to the sense of guilt, he kills himself. So, this is a lot of drama filled with irreversible tragic waste. There is an element of conflict in Shakespearean tragedies. There are two types of conflicts which can be seen in Shakespearean comedies: external, which the protagonist has with the other antagonist and other people, and there are internal conflicts also. For example, the conflict in the mind of Hamlet when he says to be or not to be, when he is overbrooding whether he should kill his uncle or not. So that is an example of internal conflicts. So we can see a lot of external as well as internal conflicts in Shakespearean tragedies. The conflict brings the tragic flaw of the heroes to the surface. Now here also the element of tragedy comes. Now the tragic flaw could have been lied passive in the personality of the protagonist. But the conflict is such that it brings to surface the tragic flaw at that moment when the hero is asked to action, and that conflict leads to the death or the final tragedy of the protagonist. The conflicts are such that brings about undeserving sufferings. The hero does not deserve the sufferings because basically he is a good person. He has goodness in him. So all his sufferings are undeserving, but still he suffers. And finally it leads to the devastation of the protagonist, and with him the devastation and tragic end of many other characters. Now Shakespeare also uses the element of supernatural in his tragedies. Those elements can be ghosts, witches, prophetic apparitions, etc. Now, it is used only as deus ex machina, as told by Aristotle. They do not lead to the tragedy, they just provoke or they just add to the tragic flaw of the hero, which finally leads them to the tragic end. The real cause of the tragedy is the hero's own tragic flaw or hamartia. So the supernatural elements, the example of supernatural elements can be seen in Hamlet's father, the ghost of Hamlet's father, by whom he came to know that he did not die a natural death, but he was killed by his uncle. He was murdered by his own brother. The three witches in Macbeth are a very good example of the element of supernatural, who provoke him Now, we can't say that these apparitions lead the hero to take tragic action. No, the real cause of his tragedy and downfall is his tragic flaw. So, the three witches, they make prophecy that Macbeth will be the king, but still it is the inordinate ambition in Macbeth which leads him to rethink over the three witches' prophecies. Now, the structure of Shakespearean tragedy. Structure means the plot. Usually, Shakespeare divides his action or the plot into 5 acts. Act 1 is the act of exposition and outline of the situation, where we are introduced to the protagonist, the other people, the scene, the place, and what is happening all around, the conflict. Now, Act 2 continues the action towards further action. Act 3 is the main climax of the plot, where the irreversible action happens. Now, Act 4 has further development of 3 acts leading inevitably to the final act. And the Act 5 is the outcome and revelation. Revelation means when all the ties are open and we come to know the secrets. So, the outline and revelation and the death of the protagonist, the death of the hero. Now, a very interesting Shakespearean characteristics in his tragedy is his comic relief. Now, comic relief is an introduction of a comic scene or a light incident or a dialogue of a fool in the form of comic relief. Now, the purpose of the inclusion of some lighter scenes between the tragic scenario, there are 3 purposes. Now, comic relief is also not without any purpose. It has got very serious purposes. For a sense of relief amid the sad, tragic happenings. Now, we can imagine that a scene of continuous tragic happenings is going on. The audience or the readers, they become tired of all these sad happenings. So, this comic relief, this light scene or a very light comic incident is introduced between the general drama of pain, I can say, for a sense of relief. Then, secondly, it helps in preparing the audience for a greater tragic scene which will follow, which is coming next. Hence, it enhances the tragic effect. Thirdly, to clarify that life is not totally tragic, not totally comic. Life is a blend of joys and sorrows. So, comic relief is also a very important, salient feature of Shakespearean tragedy. In Shakespearean tragedies, we can witness no poetic justice. Now, what is poetic justice? In a play or any novel, when the author gives justice in the end, where the virtuous are rewarded in the end and the villainous people are punished in the end. But because it is a tragedy, and because it is a tragedy which has resulted due to the tragic flaw of the hero himself, there is no poetic justice. There is no rewarding of the good and punishing of the bad. The characters are not rewarded or punished according to their merits or demerits, and the hero, he suffers a lot. The protagonist suffers a lot as a result of his tragic flaw or the weakness of personality, and some other characters, they suffer due to his tragic flaw, and they also become innocent prey of the hero's weakness of personality. So there is a general tragic waste. Though the villainous characters are exposed and punished in the end, but the hero and the innocent characters are also pulled in the tragedy too. So both suffer. So there is no poetic justice in Shakespearean tragedy. Now, 2 elements are included in a tragedy that is pity and fear, in order to bring about the purgation, the catharsis of these feelings. Pity, when we feel soft hearted towards others' sufferings. Now, the feeling of pity arouses in the readers and in the audience and in the common people for the undeserving sufferings of the protagonist. When we see the protagonist suffer, when we see that he is a great person, he is a good person, basically he is of good disposition, he should not have suffered so, we feel a sense of pity. We cry for him. Secondly, there is a feeling of fear. We fear for ourselves getting the same sufferings. Now, here also the point of greatness comes. Because when we think that if this great person can suffer a downfall, we are not great. We are common people. So we can also suffer if we have the same tragic flaw. So the feelings of pity and fear are aroused through a tragedy, and in the end they are purgated. Now let us have a quick revision of Shakespearean tragedy. Now Shakespeare based his tragedy on the definition given by Aristotle, who says a tragedy is an imitation of an action that is serious and also having magnitude, complete in itself, with incidents arousing pity and fear, wherewith to accomplish catharsis of these emotions. Now, salient features of Shakespearean tragedy are that there is a tragic hero whom we call protagonist also. He is a royal person. Generally, he is a king or an army general or a person on a high post. He has a high social status. He is of virtuous character. Basically, he is great as well as good. Now he faces adversity in his life and he dies in the end. In no Shakespearean tragedy does the hero remains alive in the end, and there is a reversal of fortune in the end. We pity his situation, we feel what he was and what he is at present, and that maximize the tragic effect. Now there is a hamartia or tragic flaw in the hero's personality, and this hamartia means the weakness of personality in the protagonist, which is inaction in Hamlet, which is inordinate ambition in Macbeth, and that is gullibility. He believes a lot in whatever people says in Othello, and that is misjudgment in King Lear. Now, in Shakespearean tragedies, there is a great tragic waste, and that tragic waste is irreversible because it is not a comedy, it is a tragedy where the revelation comes after the main tragic action. There is a death. There are deaths and tragic waste at a large level. Hamlet wastes his life and others' lives due to his overthinking and inaction. Macbeth, a trustworthy army general, he ends up as a murderer and loses his own life too. Now you see, he wanted to become a king, he wanted to have more, but he lost what he already had. King Lear loses his best daughter and is abused by his other daughters who flattered him. Othello murders his innocent wife and kills himself in the end. The elements of conflicts may be external and internal. External conflicts are the conflicts between the hero and the villains, and the internal conflicts are the confusion, the dubious situations in the mind of the protagonist. Now, the conflict brings the tragic flaw of the heroes to the surface. The conflicts are such that bring about the undeserving sufferings and devastation to the protagonist. There is an element of supernatural in Shakespearean tragedies, and as I earlier told you, that they do not lead to the tragedy, but it is the tragic flaw which leads to the hero's tragedy. They just provoke them or they reveal some secret. For example, the ghost in Hamlet's father and the three witches in Macbeth. Now, the Shakespearean tragedy's plot is divided into 5 acts, where Act 1 includes the exposition and outlining of the situation. Act 2 continues the action towards further action. Act 3 has the climax of the plot. Act 4, there is a further development of the Act 3 and leading inevitably to the final and fifth act. Act 5 is the outcome and revelation and result of all the four acts, and it leads to the death of the hero. There is a comic relief in Shakespearean tragedy in the form of a laughing scene or a light incident, and the purpose is for a sense of relief among the sad tragic happenings, preparing the audience for a greater tragic scene coming next, hence the enhancement of the tragic effect to clarify that life is a blend of joys and sorrows. In the end, there is no poetic justice in Shakespearean tragedies. The characters are not rewarded or punished according to their merits or demerits. Excuse me. The hero suffers a lot as a consequence of his tragic flaw, and some other characters also become innocent prey of his tragic flaw. Though the villainous characters are exposed and punished in the end, but the hero and the innocent characters are pulled in the tragic waste too. Catharsis means the purgation of feelings of pity and fear. Now, these two kinds of feelings are to be found in Shakespearean tragedies. Pity, when we feel pity for the undeserving sufferings of the protagonist, and we feel fear that we may also suffer as the result of our tragic flaw. So I hope you have understood the basic salient features of Shakespearean tragedy. Thank you so much.